And it's a very large program that was supported by more than 150 staff members across campus, all who had different data needs. And really, when we started this process, we found that there were just a lot of manual work when we started to make this transition. Everything from major changes to payments, refunds, and then we were just finding that the orientation team was having struggles sharing real-time data across the institution with more than 150 people supporting orientation. And we also have a very decentralized academic advising process that is all housed in the different colleges across campus. And so, really, one of the things when we started this process, we sat down together as a team and we said, I feel like something's wrong with this presentation. Move everything to Slate. Okay. Okay. I'm off my game today. I don't know what's going on. I don't even know what slide I'm on. Okay. So, we said that we wanted to move everything to Slate as our Slate solution. We wanted to get away from this fragmented approach and so many different systems across the university. And when we first met, the person who was in head of charge of orientation at the time said, I just want you to reproduce everything, all the reports, the registration form, and they're like, I don't really want to change. And I remember saying in that meeting, I really do not want to replicate what's been done because there's just so much fragmented and challenges. And I said, I really don't want to replicate. I want to innovate. And I want to use the full power of Slate and all the different solutions and tools that we have available to in Slate. So when we started this project, we really did take a project management approach. And I know for many of us in the room, you're probably very used to on a day-to-day basis where staff and faculty and people you work with will come to you and say, I need an event, I need a form, I need a survey, I need a query, I need a report. But really what we wanted to do was to sort of step back and look at the whole process from start to finish. So we gathered the team, and one of the things that I insisted on was that we met twice a month for 90 minutes in person. I really felt that meeting in person was really important. And we started with, okay, how we're going to move this into Slate, but we started with all the good questions that you start with at any project. Who are the stakeholders? What are we trying to accomplish? What works? What doesn't work? What are the pain points? And what could this experience, both for students and families and staff and advisors who were supporting this program, what could it look like? And what could we do to really reduce all of the manual work that goes into supporting this program, and how could we use Slate Solutions to do that? So one of the things that we talked about, it was just so important that all of the data needed to be in Slate. And it's one of the things I say all the time. It all starts with the data because you really can't do what you need to do and join the data and connect it together unless it's all there. So one of the things that we just decided really on was everything needed to move to Slate, not just the event data, but all the data that was needed by every single office. And whatever we didn't have in Slate or in Banner already, we needed to make sure we were collecting it on registration forms. One of the things that we really wanted to do was we had a very sort of fragmented placement testing process. The scores were not in Slate, and communications were going out about other systems. I remember at one time I literally was running a report, copy and pasting IDs on a weekly basis in order to send communications out because the data about who needed to take placement was not in Slate. So we just wanted to make sure we had everything in there, everything from housing to our SIS login and MFA. We also had a pre-advising survey that was in a completely different tool that was not connected to student data anyway. We had another system for payment information, and we just knew we needed to move all of that into Slate. And we also knew that every single staff member who was going to be working with orientation needed to be a user in Slate. And so we created an orientation role, a user role, and assigned a college or department to that user. And we used our custom user fields. And again, this is just a small snapshot of just making sure we had all of the data, everything from the advising appointment times and locations, which were again previously in a separate system, all of the event information related to the event, test scores, placement scores. We just wanted to make sure everything was in Slate so that we could really use that. One of our solutions was to move to application scoped events. We'd never really used application scoped events. We'd always used person scoped prior to this. And one of the benefits for that for us was really creating a one-to-one relationship between the orientation event and the application. And what that really did for us was supports term changes and subsequent applications. So if a student later applied as a transfer student, that orientation was tied to their previous first year freshman application. If a student changed from fall to spring, etc., what it did was any orientation registrations would be tied to the application as opposed to the student. And so when they needed to come around and sign up for orientation in a future semester, that would all be supported. The other thing that was absolutely critical was tying it to the student's admitted major, because so much of the work that we do at orientation is driven by the student's college and major. And so again, creating that one-to-one relationship between the orientation event and the student's college and major was important. And it really gives us a clear path to all application and person scope data. And then we only needed to collect data needed for the event. So I previously mentioned, no, that's the later slide. So here's an example of how we are setting up the scope of our events. It's an application scoped event, and then we are very easily able to join to the person to gather and pull in all the application and person scope data. The other thing that we chose to do was go with a very dynamic template form. One of the things that we had done prior to this was really create a different template and a different form for every different kind of event. And because we have various kind of orientation events, um, we would have, in our previous way we did things was just to have multiple event templates. And what we did was use one, and allowed us to accommodate different kinds of orientation. So we have a first year freshman, we have a transfer, we have an international. And so in the event template in the form, we just use a lot of section breaks and a lot of conditional logic to make this one template uh, usable for the different kinds of orientation. And so you can see we had different logic on the different sections, section breaks, and allows us to use just one template for multiple events. The other thing that we did was to use merge fields to dynamically display person and application data on this form. And one of the things that has been a big source of manual work for us is students changing their major. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was dynamically display key application and person data points in the registration form and really ask students to verify what they were doing. So we created our merge fields, and then we were able to put those inside of the registration form. And so this is what it looks like. At the top, you can see the liquid markup that allows us to insert these different merge fields, and then what is the student's experience. And one of the things that I really wanted to curate was kind of the TurboTax experience that I do when I do my tax forms and probably other tax software. It's like you get to the end of a section and it says, hey, is everything okay? Does this look right? Check this before you move on to the next section. And so by really just using those dynamic page breaks and conditional logics kind of curate the student as they move through the registration form. And so one of the first things that we do is ask the student to say, is this major correct? And if it's not, we send them down the path of making sure that they follow up and get their major changed before they do anything else. And so really we just created a more responsive, dynamic experience when the student was registering, making sure that we were collecting all the information that we needed, but also nothing more than what we needed. Using all of the data that was available to us in Slate, both person and application. So another thing that we did, this is an example of information that we did need to collect. So asking students about if they needed any assistance with disabilities or if they had dietary restrictions. In the past, our registration form just had open text fields, and there was really no good way to aggregate that information and provide it out to colleges, the departments. They just had a whole bunch of text. And so what we did was work with our departments to say, what is it that we need to put in here, and create prompt lists so that they have a curated list of disability accommodations or dietary restrictions, and then pop open a text box only if one is needed. So if one of the allergies was not listed on there and they said it was other, we'd pop open a text box and allow the student to do that. The other thing that we do is allow with students, we need to collect information about housing, both for students and parents who are going to spend the night on campus. And so we were able to do that for our 2-day events. So in the early part of summer, we have overnight events. When we get later in the summer or for spring, we only do 1-day events. And so again, just kind of using that um, conditional logic, only displaying the housing information just for the events that have housing incorporated in those 2 days events. So again, using that conditional logic on the section breaks to sort of get us to um, displaying the right information for the student, regardless of what orientation program they have or what time of year it is. The other key concept that we did was to use related events. And one of the things that we do inside of our event registration is to use the event widget and conditional logics to do section breaks to dynamically display the advising appointment selector, which allowed advisors to self-manage their orientation appointments. Advising appointments. So we pre-built scheduler appointments and inserted a scheduler um, event widget that allowed the advisors to schedule the student into whatever appointment time or whatever advisor that they wanted. And so I'm sure many of your students like ours come in if they have done college credit while they're in high school. You know, the advising experience for a student that has 40 hours of college credit versus the student that has no college credit is very different. Sometimes they want to assign the advisor with more experience to someone who has more credit, etc. And it just allowed our advisors to get in internal facing event widget section to assign their appointments. And then it's all again based on conditional logic. The advisors would only see the advising appointments for their college, etc. So the other thing that we did was use related events to help manage our college capacities. So again, there are, because that advising is very decentralized, for example, the College of Architecture might only be able to see 14 students per day. The College of Arts and Sciences may be able to see 60 students per orientation. And so by using related events, we and used event widget and conditional logic and section breaks just allow us this is not even the right thing. I'm really off today. Um, anyway, this is what this looks like. We relate. I did so much better at the Ohio thing. Manage college capacities for each event, manage advising appointments. I need to practice this. I'm going to associate those events with the primary orientation event. And this is what it looks like on the application and activity section. And so we can see each level. We see the overall orientation registration. We see the college um, capacity for the particular college, and then we see the individual advising appointment. And then by doing related events, these events are all tied together. So if a student were to cancel, it cancels all the events. When we mark a student as no show, it marks all no shows, attend, etc. And so it allows us to do that. The other thing I mentioned was they had a pre-advising survey that was not connected with any student data. We were asking the student to completely fill out everything from top to bottom: your name, your major, your orientation date, all of those things. And a lot of times students would fill it out incorrectly. And it just really decreased the ability for meaningful interaction for the advisors. And so what we did was create an application scoped form, created a one-to-one relationship with the application, and we were able again to use merge fields to display key personal data points. And what we do is collect a lot of information about the student, how they're feeling about their transition to college and what areas they might need help with, what their goals, dreams, and aspirations are. So the advisor has all of that in front of them before they ever meet with the student, and allow the student to review core curriculum and do some pre-selection of courses. And so this is what that looks like. And we were able to insert the merge fields to make it feel very like we know who you are, we know what your major is, and then we can move them right into the advising survey. The other thing that we were able to do is based on how students answer those questions is to really kind of put together a connection score and even a potential risk for that student behind the scenes to look at some different things. And so that's another thing that we're able to do with this survey. And finally, the other major thing we implemented was Slate payments. So again, we had a separate payment system before where we had students register when they registered, made their orientation payment at that time. But of course, students, families had to change dates, change guests, all of those things. And it resulted in a ton of work. Every single time someone made a change, they had to refund, which was a very manual process. What they paid before, make them repay it again. And I mean, constantly all day long at orientation, they were doing refunds and corrections and all of that. And we really moved to Slate Payments. We decided to open up the payment window only 10 days before the event, and allow students to update and change anything that they needed to. And we just went to a policy of no refunds because we allowed them to review and pay, even up to the day before and the day of orientation. And we went from hundreds and hundreds of refunds to just one. And we actually had a pair of twins that registered both of their parents and paid for both of their parents on their registration. And so it just resulted in a much cleaner, friendlier process for our students and families, but also just reduced mountains of manual work that our staff was doing at the orientation program and could be more focused on the things they needed to be focused on. So those are kind of our three major behind the scenes things that we implemented: application scoped events, related events, and payments, so that these were all the good solutions that helped us to move to what would update the student experience. And then I'm going to turn that over to Corey to talk about that.
Thanks, Mark. So I want to emphasize the importance of everything that Mark mentioned already. So getting your data set up and clean is one of the most important things you can do, and thinking through that thoughtfully is critical so that you can do all of the fun stuff that I'm about to talk about on the front-facing side for students and families. So let's start with our admissions portal. First off, disclaimer, I did not build this myself, but everything that I'm going to talk about are all of the Slate concepts that you would need to build within a portal. So we've added to our existing portal, and this is what the admissions experience looks like for our students who have applied and been admitted to the university. So as we move ahead, next slide, one of the first things that we did was we took our admitted student checklist that was a static checklist and we made it dynamic now that all of this information was available to us in Slate. So we turned our checklist into an interactive experience. When they took the action, we marked it as complete. We also set up some existence exports and liquid markup to accomplish all of this. So on the side, I've indicated we have a couple of existence exports that drives the liquid markup inside of this checklist to personalize the content and notify students when they have taken the action, that data point comes over, it clears it on their checklist and marks it as complete. In addition to that, we also personalized our SIS login experience. So when our students are logging in for the first time, it's a different experience than when they log in anytime after their the initial login. So we swapped out the links because there's two different links now that we had all of that data available to us. And then another key function for us that we wanted to ensure we locked down was we wanted students to pay the enrollment fee before they could proceed to take any additional actions like orientation and housing. So now that we had the payment inside of Slate, we could immediately open up orientation and housing information as soon as they took that action and made the payment through Slate Payments. Next slide. If you're interested in implementing something like this, I wanted to give you a quick example. This is what the dynamic student checklist looks like on the back end. It's a series of numbers inside of a content, or a series of sections inside of a content block per admitting unit. For Kent State, we have to have that set up for our Kent campus and regional campuses. And then really what you're doing is separating it out by liquid markup to determine, for example, first year, transfer, and all of your other student types. So this is what it looks like on the back end. Of course, it looks pretty because of the CSS styling that's applied to this. But on the back end, this is what it would look like to set up a checklist like that. Next slide. Inside of the next thing that we needed to do after enhancing our checklist and making it interactive is we had to actually display the orientation events. So inside of our portal, we added an orientation section with orientation cards that pops up as soon as a student takes action. So this is a new section inside of our content blocks that we added. And what we're doing essentially is liquid looping through the orientation events with an independent subquery. So on the next slide, I'll show you a little bit of what this looks like. And if you're not familiar with liquid looping, what I will say is there's fantastic documentation in the knowledge base, which I've linked off into the presentation. But essentially, you're setting up an independent subquery on the back end of Slate. You're writing a liquid loop statement, a for statement, and then looping through all of the relevant details that you want to display for your event in the portal. And of course, the CSS styling, again, is what makes it look beautiful inside of the portal itself that I showed you on the previous slide. Next slide. One thing that is key for Kent, as Mark mentioned, we have a very decentralized structure, and everything has to be tied to the student's major and by extension, their academic college. So inside of Slate, we had to come up with a specific solution that allowed us to compare the student's major and match that up with the relevant college registrations. So inside of Slate, we have a primary event, which is our general orientation event. And then Mark hit on our related events, which are separated out per college into subfolders. So this allows us to go into the portal and display, find the student's major, connect it to the student's college, and then serve up the relevant related events, which is where the capacity is located for each of those colleges throughout our campus. The comparison statements that I wanted to call out here are written on the back end. So we're taking the student's major and we're exporting the college name, which for us is the export value 3. We're comparing that against a literal, and that's what's doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the back end to say, all right, what is the student's major? What is the college that it belongs to? And then let's match up the major or the college with the corresponding folder for that college's orientation. Next slide. The next piece is we had to then look at the related event capacity and make sure that when our college's capacity and their number of advising appointments that they can take in one day were met, we needed to pull the primary event down. So really what we're trying to accomplish here is to say, show the primary event, show orientation, the general orientation event, only if the related event for that student's college has available space. So in order to do that, we had to export and compare the start dates for the primary and the related events, which as a fun fact, I tried to dig with Slate AI and it was telling me this isn't possible, this isn't possible. And I turned to Mark and team and I said, guys, I can't find any solution to do this. And we were super close. Mark was on the phone with our vice president saying that we're not sure if we're going to be able to do this. And all of a sudden, I had this thought to connect the two pieces of data by exporting and comparing the start date of the primary versus the related event. And by doing that, I was able to join the two different pieces of data together, which is what I'm showing over in the GIF off on the side. And that would allow me, of course, to then look at and to ensure that there is at least one space available in the related event for that student's college. But we were very close to throwing in the towel and saying this wasn't going to work. Next slide. Once a student registers, then we curated the next round of experiences for them. So inside of the portal, as soon as they register, inside of that checklist, step number 5 pops up, which is highlighted in the GIF there. So as soon as they register, this is immediate because everything is inside of Slate. The actual components here are a anchor hyperlink, which is what you see on screen, that pulls them down to the next step section. We also personalized it based off of the type of event. So of course, we don't have the same name for orientation for all of our students. We like to call them different things. So we display the custom name for the audience. We display the event date, and then if there's a virtual component to, if they're a virtual student, that switches out as well and is personalized for them. But that section turns on at that point, and then when you click that hyperlink, we can go to the next slide, it'll pull you down to the orientation next steps section inside of the portal. Next slide, Mark. Thank you. Oh, I forgot. Did I had some stuff on the back end?
You had the extra, yeah.
Okay. All right, we can go to the next slide. I'll plan on covering that as we go. Then once they click it, it pulls them down to the section where there are personalized call to action buttons for the pre-orientation to-do list for our students. So this section becomes available at least 30 days prior to the orientation date, and the action items, of course, disappear. when they complete them. If the student were to cancel their registration, we have a statement set up on the back end, an existence statement that shuts down this portal and this part of the portal for the student and encourages them to go and re-register. Next slide. On the comms side, we had a couple of different objectives, like Mark mentioned. We really wanted to reduce major changes during orientation, and we wanted to increase self-service capabilities for our students while simultaneously delivering that personalized list of items to get ready for orientation. If you're looking for a sample sequence, I put it up here just as an example, but the main thing I wanted to call out is we've made this evergreen by using the form start date. So students, as their orientation dates approach, fall into these queries based off of this cadence that's outlined here. And then go ahead and click the mouse twice mark. And inside of the message, we've highlighted the two different things that we want them to take action. We want them to review their major, and we also want them to edit or cancel their registration if they need to change their orientation date. Again, reducing the need to call into the office. We wanted them to self-service through this process. Next slide. Last but not least, inside of the comms, this is what this looks like. So I wanted to give you an example. It's very similar to how the portal is set up, but we used a combination of existence exports to determine whether or not we would need to display something. And that's what's on the screen to the left. Go ahead and click twice mark. We used liquid markup to conditionally display different pieces of content depending on the audience and their needs. And we used content blocks to standardize the content. For example, when parking changes, we didn't want to have to constantly rewrite that. We just change the code in one place and it updates across the board. But we do have student and parent campaigns that lead up to pre-orientation, which have all of the things that they need to do off on the side, which mirrors the portal and provides them a little additional context pre-orientation. And now I'll turn it over to Dylan.
Awesome. Thanks, Corey. So I want to take us on a bit of a journey to look into two of the additional portal projects that we worked on in collaboration with the Kent State team to support this orientation work and the overhaul of this entire program and process. So one of the first things that really stood out to me when meeting with Mark and Corey and the rest of the Kent State team was exactly what Mark mentioned at the top of the presentation, that the drive behind this entire endeavor was really clearly to innovate and think creatively about improving this large-scale undertaking for everyone involved. And we really tried to lean into that in the spirit of our collaboration together. Our overall focus as a partner in this effort was to mirror Kent State's intentionality and thoughtfulness in our approach to the technical solutions that we proposed specifically in the portal space. We wanted to develop a solution that would meet Kent State's needs and be sustainable and scalable as our orientation program continued to grow and evolve over the years. So our goal was always to build something that the Kent State team could own and grow long after our engagement ended. The guiding and underlying question that we returned to recurringly throughout the discovery process with the Kent State team was, what are we truly trying to accomplish with the tools that we're building in Slate? And what is the ultimate user need that we are trying to meet here? So with that foundation, we structured our projects in the portal space specifically to allow for regular engagement with the different stakeholders on campus and to support a feedback loop, which allowed us to iterate on the final product until we were all aligned with our users on how to meet their needs in Slate. We really narrowed in on two specific portal solutions to support the overall efforts at overhauling and streamlining the orientation experience for both internal and external audiences. And we spent about 6 months or so in partnership building and testing these portals prior to their inaugural launch last year. Next slide, please. Our first portal was internal facing and aimed to organize all of the orientation related data that was newly housed in Slate in a way that gave Kent State staff quick access to the information that they needed to support students in both the lead up to and during their orientation events on campus. We wanted to put the data in the hands of staff and empower them to take action on student records in an organized and Slate-centric manner. So the subtext is that we really wanted to cut down on the number of emails that Mark's team was receiving prior to orientation events and the number of spreadsheets that were being shared across campus. The internal facing portal was meant to be one centralized source of truth for all orientation efforts that provided a really curated user experience based on the role and business process needs of the individual user. And this concept was the foundation for our approach to this build. We developed a fairly simple design for this portal view, which you can see on the screen here. We leveraged a side navigation bar and organized the relevant student data into a pretty clean and simple table view. I'll just note that this is test student data. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, some of these names will be familiar to you, but I don't want to startle anyone by displaying things that look like real student IDs on the screen here. We implemented an external JavaScript library to generate a little bit more of a dynamic table layout with some advanced display and filtering capabilities. So for those folks in the room who are familiar with data tables as a JavaScript plugin, we leveraged that heavily in this portal. And again, all of this was grounded in the goal of surfacing only the most relevant information to any given user based on their orientation-specific role. Next slide, please. We encourage the Kent State team to leverage that custom user scope field that Mark mentioned to assign these orientation-specific roles to their internal users, knowing that this type of functionality would likely have other applications as their orientation program continued to develop. And we leaned on that custom role field to build in some pretty basic filtering for static content blocks in this portal's main view. So each static content block contains more or less the same table layout of student data, but each table and the filtering capability that we built into that table was uniquely customized to meet the needs of each user role. So some tables displayed a little bit more data or a little bit less data than others, depending on what information was most important to any given user role. We have a couple of examples sort of laid out here. Our housing and dining folks, for example, didn't need quite as much information about all of the different orientation attendees. They didn't necessarily need to know which major college the students were applying to or had been admitted to. They really just needed to know, are these students planning on spending the night on campus? Do they have any dietary restrictions? Our advising and admissions roles, on the other hand, required a little bit more robust look into the information about students that were registered for orientation. So those views were a little bit more built out in terms of the data display. The advising role specifically had an added layer of filtering built into our data display using some additional liquid markup that allowed us to only list students in the portal that were assigned to any advisor's affiliated college. So we were able to narrow in a little bit more specifically and again surface the most relevant information to users using some additional liquid markup. This build in general eliminated the old practice that Mark mentioned of exporting data from different campus systems, manipulating large Excel sheets with the goal of identifying actionable data. In this Slate portal, users simply had to log in and the portal rendered exactly the information that they needed to see to support their business processes. Next slide, please. We added to the personalization of our data display by designing a pop-up window that allowed only certain roles to access additional student information outside of that table layout. So knowing that there were data points that were of extreme use to certain individuals on campus that maybe didn't make sense to put into a table, we leaned on a pop-up to generate some additional real estate for us. We also built role-specific actions into the pop-up window so that when necessary, users had quick access to the different related areas of Slate or links to external systems that allowed them to support various aspects of the student orientation experience. So our advisor user group, for example, was empowered to submit a request form to update student application data directly from this pop-up, and they were given the tools to both schedule and reschedule students for their unique advising appointments via a direct link to that student's orientation registration form response. Everything about this build, again, was designed to put the right information in front of the right people at the right moment. And the goal was for a user to open this portal the morning of orientation and know exactly who was coming to campus, what action items were incomplete, and where they needed to intervene on a student-by-student basis. We did not want folks to have to run a report at 8 a.m. and hope that nothing had changed data-wise from the day before. So that shift from surfacing data in different systems to surfacing actionable data in one system was really the through line of everything that we built in partnership with Mark and Corey and the team. And it also carried directly into how we approached the second portal that we built together, which we will dig into on the next slide. So with the internal Kent State team fully equipped and empowered, we then turned our attention to the other half of the orientation experience, which is the students themselves. Our challenge shifted slightly. Kent State staff needed clarity and control in the orientation process, but students needed something a little bit different. They didn't necessarily need more information. They just needed the right information at the right time, and they needed it presented in a way that made their next steps at orientation clear and obvious. So our external facing portal became a place where a student could see their personalized orientation schedule, review their outstanding placement test requirements, and take any other necessary actions required of them, all without leaving the Slate ecosystem. And you can see on the screen here a GIF of the mobile version of our portal that we put directly into the hands of students. Any major changes or advising appointment updates that were made to a student's record in Slate were reflected in that portal in real time, making it a dynamic and usable tool to help students navigate their on-campus event experience. The needs and expectations of both the external portal audience and the Kent State team really pushed us to think creatively about the technical foundations of this portal in particular. We aim to develop a polished and hyper-personalized portal experience for students while striking a balance between technical complexity and ease of maintenance, knowing how critical it would be for our counterpoints at Kent State to be able to update this portal annually. So we plan to leverage as much inherent Slate functionality as possible, knowing that this portal, again, would ultimately be maintained by more day-to-day users, but we also looked into more advanced non-native functionality to support these real-time updates that we knew students would need from this tool. Next slide, please. Our technical approach for this portal centered on a surprisingly elegant solution. So the Kent State team in managing this portal simply populates a spreadsheet template that we generated with the details of every orientation event in Slate. So that's session times, locations, student-facing descriptive text, all of the nitty-gritty goes into a portal, or sorry, a spreadsheet. And we built a custom tool that converts that data into a JSON object, which can then be stored directly in the Notes tab of each Slate orientation event. From there, scripting in the external portal does all of the heavy lifting. It reads a student's orientation registration, parses the relevant related event data, and generates a fully personalized agenda that updates for the student in real time as the day unfolds and as time passes throughout their orientation experience. This configuration certainly does require significant organization and a bit of lift from the internal orientation team at the outset of orientation planning every year. But once all of the event details have been confirmed and added to Slate, the portal functions smoothly to support an organized and impactful student experience when attendees arrive on campus. So what this all means in practice is rather than having a staff member handwrite schedule changes on printed agendas at a check-in table, a student simply walks into orientation, pulls up their portal, and sees exactly where they need to be and when, with any changes updated to reflect last-minute adjustments to advising schedules, to majors, etc. Additionally, this setup allows for day of changes to event logistics, so location changes due to weather or capacity, for example, those changes can be pushed live in the portal by simply editing the associated Slate events. So the orientation experience overall gets a little less chaotic for both the attendees and for folks managing the events. And it starts to feel a little bit more like it was designed just for these student attendees, which ultimately is exactly what Kent State set out to create. These portals have supported one full cycle of orientation events, and the Kent State team is managing and evolving these tools largely on their own, which again was always our goal in partnership with them. But getting here certainly wasn't without its challenges, and honestly, some of the richest parts of this project are the lessons that we all picked up along the way. So Mark and Corey, I'd love to turn it back to you to chat through some of our lessons learned in this endeavor together.
Thank you, Dylan.
Yeah.
So we really did take that phrase or mantra from the very first meeting that we had of don't replicate and innovate. And that would just be one of the things that I would advise you all to do. And we talk about this a lot at Kent State, how important it is to engage in the productive struggle. And Dylan was just saying that, sometimes, this isn't really working the way we want it to work. What can we do differently? And really, from the get-go, we always wanted to curate a really positive experience, both for the students and families attending, but also for all of our staff that were supporting the program. And so we were able to get away from the constant back and forth of sharing spreadsheets, putting things in teams, making refunds, getting away from all of that manual work to be focused on the students and families that were at orientation. One of the major improvements has been the decrease of day of major changes, because at every step of the way, from when a student first registered for orientation through all the communications that Corey was mentioning, we're putting the major front and center and saying, is this still your major? If it's not, we need you to change it. And what that did was we weren't dealing with the last minute trying to change students' advising appointments and all of that, and really decrease the number of day of major changes by 60%. And so that students were able to have their schedule be the way it was supposed to be, no last minute scrambling. We literally were used to cross out advising appointments on students' paper agendas and say, here's your new appointment time and location. Whereas all of that now is reflected in the portal. And even when we do have day of major changes, and the appointment is assigned, it all happens and is immediately available for the student to see in real time that their appointment has changed, who their advisor is, and all of that. As I mentioned, we went from hundreds of refunds down to just one last year, and I'm pretty sure we haven't done any refunds yet this year. So just really that whole idea of trying to take care of the accounting of everything and keeping all of that straight, and that manual process is just now gone. And so we really did use that mantra to really significantly reduce our manual work, but especially during those program days when you have, for us, as many as 700 people on campus per day, going around campus to various sessions and really trying to keep everything organized and making a very smooth experience for all the students and families.
And adding on to that as a whole, I mean, searching for those evergreen solutions, thinking through your data and coming up with the best structure, the best practice, the best system, was really key for our comms and our portals as well. And then as you think about, the transition from working with Carnegie to supporting this on our own, one of the biggest things that we emphasized is we needed to have individuals who are not in Slate on a day-to-day basis help us maintain this, so that Mark and I could continue to work on additional projects and our teams could support additional projects. But even down to the fact that, like, just recently we added on a new personalized piece onto an agenda where they need to speak with a financial advisor on our campus if they fall into specific categories. So just a testament to the work that we've done with Carnegie and the learning and the growth that we've done ourselves as the Kent State team. We were able to make some significant upgrades and enhancements in a personalized way to the agenda for this cycle this summer specifically too. So.
Thank you, Corey. really appreciate you joining us today. We'd love for your feedback on the evaluation when that comes out. You can also reach out to us through LinkedIn if you want to connect after today's presentation. But at this point, we'd like to go ahead and open it up for questions.
50 minutes.
So
Not
we
bad.
were 5 minutes over, really. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry, some of it was just my I don't know. I'm just off my
So,
game today. So
it was 2 minutes for you, Mark, 2 minutes for me, and that pretty much accounted for the
okay,
delay.
okay,
So,
okay.
yep.
That's
I'll do better.
I mean, it's fine even if we landed there, like,
Yeah. No, yeah.
but
Yeah, I
And
just need to
it's been a
smooth
few
out.
weeks
I
since
don't
you've
know what
done it.
happened.
I
Yeah.
know I felt way more rusty than I thought I was going into this. Like, so I'll be going over it several more
Yes,
times.
yeah. So I haven't
Yeah, me too.
opened it up since we did it at Ohio Slate, and that was probably a big mistake because that was more than 2 weeks ago, and yeah, that was actually 3 weeks ago. So that was a mistake.
Yeah.
So yeah, I need to go through and practice and smooth out and all of those things. So yeah, I will just make sure I do that before our presentation where we're doing this in 2 weeks from now. So yeah,
I feel good about it though.
yeah.
I'm really excited. I'm just excited to see people's like reactions and responses and get questions, and I think it's gonna be great.
Yeah.
And then I
Very
never did
excited.
record, Dylan. So if you want to record another practice of this, we can. So
I
I
saw
never
Corey
hit.
started
Oh,
it
you
partway
did?